Meantime, we're learning more about Officer Wilson's side of the story. Prosecutors in Missouri releasing his testimony to the grand jury, describing his encounter with Michael Brown. Here is an excerpt. Wilson said Brown looked up at him and he, quote, had the most intense, aggressive face. The only way I can describe it, it looks like a demon. That's how angry he looked. He comes back towards me again with his hands up, end quote. We're getting a look at this new picture as well of Wilson and others taken shortly after the encounter. As you can see here, there is a bruise on Wilson's face about 2 inches long. Eric Guster is a criminal defense attorney and my guest on all of this. Good to see you, Eric.
Good to see you again.
All right, so to parse this all down as to why no indictment was handed up in this case, how do you see it?
I see it as a problem on the prosecutor, because the prosecutor should have, number one, recused himself and allowed a special prosecutor to take this case.
Why?
Well, he had a vested interest in this case.
Why?
McCullough knew Darren Wilson. He worked with this police officer. He prosecuted cases with this police officer. And when you have someone who works closely with someone, they should not be allowed to prosecute them, especially in something like this.
But how would that change the evidence in the case? That wouldn't change any of the evidence, would it?
It could change how the case was presented, because everything in a trial is about presentation. And just like Ben Crump just said in his press release, in his press statement, I read this information last night, and those were softball questions to Darren Wilson.
But is that a prosecutor's duty? Because I've interviewed other attorneys about this leading up to it.
Yes.
Is it a prosecutor's duty to actually go in and present a case, or was it smart for this particular prosecutor to just lay out all the evidence for the grand jury to be able to decide, knowing that he would be under high scrutiny to make sure all the details were included?
Typically, a prosecutor lays down enough evidence to get probable cause. They don't put out all the evidence. They don't lay all this confusing information out for this jury, because in this case, he laid out a load of evidence and said, hey, go look at it, grand jury, just go look at it and decide. Why is that confusing? I
mean, he would have been criticized no matter what he did, would he not? I mean, if he didn't lay out all the evidence, then they would have said, well, he didn't lay out all the evidence.
That's why a special prosecutor should have been assigned, because he did not want to remove himself. He asked the governor to remove him. They were playing politics with this case. McCullough should have stepped down, allowed a special prosecutor to be assigned to this case, and allow someone with no interest to present this case.
So is that your only problem with it, the fact that you don't believe he asked Officer Darren Wilson on the stand tough enough questions? And would that have been enough to have a grand jury see this differently? There were witnesses who came in who they seem to rely on just as well as the officer's testimony.
I believe Wilson should have been charged by information and allowed for a preliminary hearing so that we could all see exactly what happened. Just like with the Trayvon Martin case, that case was out for the public scrutiny. I could explain why he was found not guilty because I saw everything. And in this case, just like you know, if you read something on paper, it's about the inflection of the person's voice. It's about how they present this evidence, how strongly they ask questions to get the answers that they're looking for.
But do you actually think there would have been a different conclusion? Because now everything's out in the public. I mean, they didn't even have to release all of this evidence. It's not typical in a grand jury situation, as you know, to release it all.
And I'm not sure that there would be a different conclusion. However, it's about transparency and the ability for us and the community of Ferguson who's suffering through this to see everything for themselves. Because a grand jury is private. We don't know everything. Although they release transcripts, we don't know how those questions were asked. We don't know how strongly they were asked, how strongly he was pressed. And what I read last night, I was up very late reading the transcript last night, they were softball questions to Wilson.
All right. That is Eric Guster's opinion, and a criminal defense attorney and my guest today. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.